I'd like to welcome everyone here. I want to thank everyone for coming to today's keynote and panel discussion. Should be a fairly lively discussion. Hope everyone's caffeinated and awake. My name is Mohammed Mamdani. I'm the director of the Temerty Center for AI Research and Education Medicine, or T-CAIREM, here at the University of Toronto. This is the first event co-sponsored or co-hosted by both PRiME and T-CAIREM. You're going to be hearing about PRiME fairly soon. And we're looking forward to more in the future. So it's a pleasure to be here. I want to go through the agenda very quickly. We have some opening remarks coming in from both myself and Molly. There'll be a keynote talk from Shahar, and then a Q&A. Then we'll go to panels with the discussion with Q&As and then closing remarks. And then it's time for you to socialize. So on that note, I'm going to pass it over to Molly.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm Molly Shoykett, and I am the scientific director of the Precision Medicine Initiative here at the University of Toronto, where we go all the way from diagnostics to discovery to delivery. And thrilled to have the opportunity to be co-hosting this event with T-CAIREM for to bring, University of Toronto, Baycrest, and HUJI together for this really exciting event. I wanted just to say that I want to acknowledge Paul Austin and Gail Morant, who had the vision a couple of years ago to say, hey, you guys are all doing something around aging and precision medicine. Why don't you get together? And so that's been a really fun exploration. And thanks again for bringing us together. I don't know, these slides are a little bit out of order, but Mohammed told you a little bit about T-CAIREM. I'll tell you a little bit more about the Precision Medicine Initiative. And so when we think about precision medicine, we think about precision X. And what is the X? And the X in our minds is aging, it's oncology, and it's women's health. So these are three areas of focus for us at the Precision Medicine Initiative. And the whole idea is to build community locally and build community globally. And so that's why we're thrilled to be hosting this event. It's part of our Connaught Global Sponsors Series. And so we recognize them for some of the funding. So with that, I will go ahead then and Mohammed, did you want to say anything else about T-CAIREM, or should I go ahead and introduce Shahar? Okay, so we're going to go back in time, and we'll let you say a couple more words, and then Shahar, I'll introduce.
Thank you. Sorry, I just stepped out to get a cookie because, well, priorities. And so I wanted to chat really quickly around T-CAIREM. We're really, really lucky to be able to be here at the University of Toronto, where we have some of the top departments and faculties in the world. So if you think about everything that needs to happen with AI, you're talking about statistics. We've got one of the top 10 departments in the world. Engineering, one of the top 25. Medicine, faculty medicine is one of the top 5 in the world. We have statistics, I mentioned computer science, that's among the top 10. All these ingredients are right here at the University of Toronto, which makes this an incredible ecosystem. One of the challenges here is that because we're so big, we often don't talk to each other. And so often there's not a forum for us to come together and share all the expertise that we have. And that's why T-CAIREM was created. So T-CAIREM really serves as that nexus, not only for the University of Toronto, but all over Canada for people to come together and learn about AI in medicine, develop new methods. We fund research, there's education programs, we have an infrastructure play with Google and MIT on Google Cloud, where we actually have data that you can play with. All of this is right here at the U of T for people to leverage so we can advance our knowledge in AI and advance our methods in AI, really for the purpose of adoption and making things better for society in general. So I really encourage everyone to join T-CAIREM, join PRiME. These are incredible initiatives right here at U of T where we can actually work together to advance society. So thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for adding that. I think it's incredibly important. And I think what's beautiful about our collaboration today between PRiME and T-CAIREM is that common vision and understanding the importance of AI in health and bringing us all together today. So that's really a wonderful opportunity. I just want to remind everybody that this is a University of Toronto forum, and we expect that everybody will treat it with the respect that it deserves. So let me go now and introduce Shahar Arzy. He is the Director of Computational Neuropsychiatry Lab at the Faculty of Medicine at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and the lead neurologist of the Neuropsychiatric Clinic at the Hadassah Medical Center, affiliated also with Hebrew University in Jerusalem. So what's amazing about Shahar is that he's got both sides of his brain working together in his brain, the computational side and the medicine side. And so he both sees patients and thinks about the power of AI and bringing them together. And so that's quite remarkable to have in one person. And so to do that, he got his medical degree and master's degree in cognitive science from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, his PhD from the Swiss Institute of Technology and the University of Geneva under Professor Olaf Blanke. And then he did specializations in neurology at Hadassah Medical Center and in cognitive neurology at Geneva University Hospital. So he also trained in memory research at Harvard University and has collaborated with people worldwide. And not only that, he loves to go camping and be in the outdoors and, take, I guess, advantage of the outdoors as an opportunity to refresh and think and revive. So he's got actually a really long CV. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I think what's exciting is that as a clinician focused on aging, Alzheimer's, and with this passion and not just passion, but great expertise in AI, we'll see how you're bringing them together in your presentation. So, oops, I was supposed to be on your slide. So sorry about that, Shahar. But please join me in welcoming Shahar Arzy to give us our keynote seminar.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for the introduction and the invitation and for everything you do. So today, how long time we have? Like, 35 minutes. I would like to go through the history of Alzheimer's disease and to conclude from it what went wrong, what can go better. Don't have to introduce how Alzheimer's disease is an important disorder. So in the first part of the talk, I hope it will be interesting. It's an historical survey of the history of Alzheimer's disease from its original introduction by Alzheimer's till now. And I would like to claim, if you want to listen to only 2 minutes, so please just read this slide. So the first claim is that Alzheimer's disease is a heterogeneous, multifactorial, multifaceted disease. And the second claim is that now in the data and computational era, we can take care of it. We are able to process Alzheimer's disease in the multi-level and through meta-modeling, try to derive conclusions that can help the individual patient. So just one introductory slide is that we are not speaking, we say Alzheimer's disease, but we are not speaking about the disease. Alzheimer's is actually a continuum, starts, I apologize from all of us here in the room who is above 40 years old, and going through a preclinical stage, a pre-symptomatic stage, then which is aging, which is normal aging, then mild cognitive impairment, which is a debate if it's a normal aging or not, to Alzheimer's disease dementia. Alzheimer's dementia can be mild, there are the different stages, mild, moderate, severe, but this is only the last stage. And this is important since we have to present preventive treatment at these stages, while most of the drugs that are developed are against stages 4 and 5. So we don't have much time, so let's start. And in neurology, I think it's quite special in medicine because we start from the single individual patient. We learn so much about memory from one person, Henry Molaison, HM, about frontal lobe activity from Phineas Gage. And Alzheimer's disease started from this patient, Auguste Deter, who presented to the clinical psychiatric hospital of Frankfurt referred by her husband with two main complaints. First of all, agitation, which is a behavioral problem, and disorientation. Now, if you ask people about Alzheimer's disease, what is Alzheimer's disease, people will tell you that the hallmark is memory. And we respect memory and memory research, especially in the Baycrest, but nonetheless, this was not the presenting symptom of the first patient. There she was treated by this guy, Alois Alzheimer, and since it was in Germany, the whole files were kept. And even during the war that were kept, and they were discovered only in the late 19s. And then you can find her dossier, her file, and the exact writings of Alzheimer, and it's exactly the same that we do right now in the clinics. That's what I do in my regular clinical work, is to work with the patient and ask the patient questions and write my questions and write their answers word by word. And he asks, what's your name? Auguste. Fine. Last name? Auguste. Oops. What is your husband's name? Auguste, I think. So she is not oriented for self. That's the first, most basic thing that we do. What is this? I show her a pencil, a pen, a person's key, diary, cigar, identified correctly. So she doesn't have language problem. She doesn't. And then when objects are shown to her, she does not remember after a short time. So she has a short-term memory problem. When she has to write, so she has some kind of praxis, and so forth. What year is it? 1800. So she is disoriented for time. Okay. In the interim, Alzheimer moved to München, but he believed in this concept of researcher scientist. So he asked the people in Frankfurt, when his patient died, to deliver her brain to him to München for pathological analysis. And there he did the section by himself, and he found these two things in her brain. He found the amyloid plaques, and he found the tangles, the tau tangles I draw here. And he wanted to present his findings. So he asked his mentor, Emil Krepplein, where to present it, and he said, why not to present it in the famous conference of neuropsychology in southwest Germany. So he went there and he submitted the paper. The problem was that the director of the conference was Alfred Hoch. Alfred Hoch was probably a nice person, was married to a Jew, had escaped from the Nazis at the time, but he didn't like Emil Krepplein. So he did two things. First of all, he did not allow discussion after Alzheimer's presentation. And second, he did not include his presentation in the conference proceedings. So it was only mentioned in the daily news, like the Zeitung of the Tübingen Zeitung was the only place where Alzheimer's contribution was mentioned. But Alzheimer had a nice mentor. The nice mentor was Emil Krepplein. And Emil Krepplein had two main ideas. One idea is to do classification of psychiatric diseases, which he considers the founder of the DSM, the Diagnostical Statistical Manual, that we all working in the clinical practice. The second is he claimed that all psychiatric disorders are brain disorders, which was not a consensus at the time. So he liked very much the finding of his student Alzheimer, because what he found is a young patient, 50-year-old, 50 is young, and this young patient presented with mental disorder, with agitation. So it exactly proves his theory. So he mentioned that he was not responsible to the proceedings of this conference, but he did write the psychiatry textbook with the simple name Psychiatry that everybody quoted. And in his book, he coined a new disease, Alzheimer's disease. Now, at the time, there was another guy, Oskar Fischer, active in Prague. And Oskar Fischer described 12 cases with amyloid and plaque and memory disorder in elderly population, like about 70 and 80. So what Kraepelin decided, these are two different diseases. This is Alzheimer's disease with disorientation, agitation, and this will be a senile dementia, something else. And he could do it because he wrote a textbook. So if you look here, this is a diagram that I made. This will be the clinics, this will be the pathology. So Alzheimer's disease is defined by 3 clinical deficits: disorientation, memory, and behavior. This is senile dementia. Both are related to 2 pathologies, amyloid and tau. Now, these are the different definitions of Alzheimer's disease that has made along the years. So at 69 came an English guy, so Martin Roth, and he said actually senile dementia and Alzheimer's disease are the same disease, and it may be manifested like this or like this. And in 76, Katzman in the US proposed a unified concept of Alzheimer's disease, and all these were consolidated into the McCann criteria that I had to learn by heart several times because they were the classification of Alzheimer's disease. The McCann criteria were actually wide open. They did not consider at all pathologies. They consider only clinical manifestation, and they say that there are like 7 or 8 cognitive domains, and each one, if you have 2 of them impaired, it's Alzheimer's disease. Then, at the same year of the McCann criteria presentation at 84, this guy, Sir John Hardy, had an idea. He wanted to identify families of patients with Alzheimer's disease and do a genetic analysis. So he published ads in newspapers, and he got letters from people reporting their families. The 23rd letter came from this lady, Carol Jennings. He went to see her family in Nottingham and analyzed their, and there were a family where most of the uncles and aunts had different stages of Alzheimer's disease. He did genetic analysis, and he found this proteins, the APP, amyloid protein precursor, and draw this amyloid cascade. And he came with the amyloid hypothesis, the amyloid cascade hypothesis. Now, importantly, the cascade is not an hypothesis. This is a scientific finding. The hypothesis is that what he found in this family can be actually generalized to the whole population, also to non-familial Alzheimer's disease, what is called sporadic Alzheimer's disease. And this is questionable because only less than 1% of people with Alzheimer's disease are having familial Alzheimer's disease. So they also did an analysis of some DNA that was found of Augusta D and found that she had this mutation. So they said, okay, fine, Alzheimer's disease is following the same cascade as the familial Alzheimer's disease. QA session, wow. It was just the introduction. Okay. Fine. And so people started to have mice models of amyloid. And then only in 2007, in the international working group, which means not Americans, it was published in The Lancet, said we have to include these findings. And we have to say, so Alzheimer's disease will be memory disorder plus APP. But this could not define most of patients with Alzheimer's disease. So in 2011, the American people came back with new definitions and said, okay, it has to be memory plus something. As for the biomarker, it may be considered. May be considered in American English means what it means. And this was also inserted into the DSM. Then at 2018, things completely changed. The same American people who made Alzheimer as based on mostly clinical or solely clinical basis, turned around and put everything on biology with the ATN framework, which stands for amyloid, tau, and neurodegeneration. And you had to have at least 2 out of these 3, grosso modo. It's a little bit more detailed than it, but if you identify amyloid and tau, it's Alzheimer's. Amyloid and neurodegeneration, it's Alzheimer's, and so forth. The question is why? It may be the case that in the same time there were so many efforts to develop drugs against amyloid. And if you define the disease by the amyloid and tau, and then you can clear the amyloid and tau, then you have a drug. The problem is that it didn't really help till nowadays, help patients. The question is why? A hint can come from this thing. This is a very famous diagram that is called Jack diagrams, which describes the deterioration of biology in Alzheimer's disease, starting with amyloid beta in the CSF, then amyloid in PET, then like these are the biomarkers, and this is a cascade. Now, this is very nice. The only problem is that this is not data. These are actually just curves drawn by Cliff Jack in PowerPoint, or maybe other, which everybody who did the basic mathematics actually know that this is too good to be true. It's representing data. It's not data. If you look at data, and this comes from Alan Evans in Montreal, this is data. You see, it's not as nice. And if you look at this data, you see that, for example, the first marker is actually vascular, then the second is inflammatory, then comes something of amyloid, and amyloid in the CSF, which here is the first, is actually here is the last. So how come? In the same time, more and more data was gathered about the involvement of other mechanisms which are not amyloid and tau in Alzheimer's disease. The involvement of different pathogens, the involvement of the immune system, blood-brain barrier disruption, role of the toxic agents in Alzheimer's disease. So what are we going to do? How can we get out of this mess? It's easy to conceptualize memory, amyloid, tau. Okay, that's I understand. But how can we come when we say that everything is Alzheimer's disease? So what I wanted to show you, and this was a first part, is that Alzheimer's disease is heterogeneous, multifaceted, and multifactorial disease. And now the solutions that I'm going to present, and of course it's not my solutions, there are many people share this reflection, though we are not the mainstream, is that an integrated data collection and interpretation system is needed to gather continuous and real-world personalized information across multiple domains, benchmark to get the ground truth to individual reference standard, and predict personalized progression patterns and present preventive steps accordingly. And in the time remains, I will try to elaborate more about this. So we'll have, I don't know how much time we will have to discuss, but we will discuss a little bit the clinical phenotyping of Alzheimer's disease. We'll speak about orientation, memory, neuropsychiatry, and language maybe. And Clara tool is a tool that we developed to capture this. We will speak about Alzheimer's disease as a network disorder. In the same manner, people spoke about a specific region in the brain, the medial temporal lobe as the core, or entorhinal cortex as the core of Alzheimer's disease. And I will try to claim that it's actually a pan-cortical, even a subcortical disorder. We'll speak about pathology and the different pathologies and which are important for potential prevention, about the complex of genetics, and then what is meta-modeling that can put all this together. Now let's see how much we can do, and we will have this to sign like this square, what in what part are we talking about. And the general model will look like this. We have several levels, the cognitive level, the pathology, the neuroanatomy, the genetics, and maybe more. And in each level, we have very many different players that can go around. This is the landscape of Alzheimer's disease, this and more. And that's why we need an algorithm and machine learning abilities to generalize things out of it on the one hand and find the path for the individual patient along this structure to make a precise diagnosis and precise prevention years before the disease is evident. And this is actually cure, because if you prevent things before they happen, you actually cure them. What happened when you are 150, we don't care. And we come back, first of all, I want to give you an example of orientation and why it's so difficult to diagnose it on the one hand, and why nowadays with AI we can do it. So this is several minutes ago, I showed you that Augusta D, the first patient, was presenting with disorientation. The problem is that disorientation is difficult to evaluate. The way that is evaluated nowadays is by asking the patients for their location and the exact date. Now, the only reason that I know the exact date is that today is Erev Rosh Hashanah, so I know that it's Erev Rosh Hashanah. Yeah, it's Rosh Hashanah Eve. Invited for dinner, so I know so I know the date. Otherwise, we don't exactly know if it's 22nd, 21st. And this is a nice study because it encapsulates almost 16,000 people. And what you see here, this is like the you can say suspicion index for Alzheimer's disease. This is a logistic regression value, and this is a score. So if the score is low, the chances that you have a disease is high. Alzheimer's disease is in red. So you see that, for example, here memory really distinguishes Alzheimer's disease from other neurodegenerative disorder. And the second faculty that is important in Alzheimer's disease is this orientation. But these are patients that already have Alzheimer's disease. What can we do in much earlier stages when everybody knows where he is, and if somebody doesn't know the exact date, so who cares? You also see here that other faculties like frontal is impaired in Alzheimer's disease, not as marked, but also there, and also visuospatial or praxis. So we came with the definition of Alzheimer's disease orientation, which is different from what is usually used in clinical practice. And we say that orientation is not to know where you are, but to know the relations that you have to different people around you, to different places around you, and to different events in one's life. This is orientation. And these are indeed main things that are disturbed in Alzheimer's disease. They have navigation difficulties, they retain difficulties to retain autobiographical memories, and difficulty to identify people around them. But this is more difficult to evaluate because I have to know you for this man. I have to know people around you. I have to know events in your own life. So that's why we developed Clara, and this is an effort led in the lab by Lidor Gazit, who was awarded the Paul and Pamela Austin Prize this year by the Center of Aging. And we developed a Clara that does exactly this. Does a data collection through a chatbot or different short games that the user, yeah, it's a healthy subject, otherwise not necessarily a patient, plays, and we gather information about people around, about events, about places, and then we make a simple test. The simple test is just to judge: are you closer to this person or to this person? Are you closer to this place or to another place? And we can calculate an efficiency score. And you see here two things. One is that disorientation in time, space, and person is disturbed, not only in Alzheimer's disease here in red, but also in the MCI stage. And you see that disorientation in time is disturbed first. And you see that prediction accuracy of this simple test is 95% of accuracy, much more than a one hour evaluation by neuropsychologist. Now, you all heard about blood test for Alzheimer's disease. Say, okay, fine, but if we do it in the preclinical stage, we can just do a blood test and everything is fine. So I told you first that amyloid is just part of the story, but this slide shows much more. This is a work that was done at Harvard by a student of mine, Aurelius, and Mark Doubleman, and they compared the Clara scores to the gold standard of Alzheimer's disease identification, which is PET amyloid. And what you see here is a work that was published by Oscar Hansen from the Biofinder in Lund University, and he did the same, but with respect to the biomarkers of phosphorylated tau. And what you see here is that phosphorylated tau can identify people with Alzheimer's disease with amyloid positive, but has a lot of false negative. What we have so it should be like that this will be negative and this will be positive, but they have a lot of false negative. Like I said, it's negative, but it's false, and we have false positive. Now for screening, you need false positives. Then you examine them and you say, okay, but that's what you should do for screening, but not the other way around. I would like also to convince you in the importance of orientation by linking it to the neuroanatomy, because the neuroanatomy plays an important role since it shows the heterogeneity and the complexity of the disease. And for this, we have to retain a term that is now, I think, well known in the neuroscience community, which is a default mode network. The default mode network is a brain network that is the largest brain network in the brain, and it's called a default mode because it does nothing. Does nothing means does everything. How comes? It operates when we don't do anything else. Not, for example, if we have to do something specific, like to type or to do something motor, so it will be silent because we have to concentrate on other things. But when we don't do anything, like for example, staying in an MRI magnet, then we think about actually the most important thing of our life, people around us, events in our life, places where we live. Yeah, this is which is orientation. So the default mode network is a network that processes orientation, like very similar, and it has also subnetworks that we call by the nice name DMNA, DMNAB, and DMNC. And DMNC is related mostly to memories and navigation. DMNA related to social interactions. And then you see here, in this work, you see that people with early stages of Alzheimer's disease, which means like subjective memory decline and MCI, have the activity here in the DMNC. You can see, okay. There is here something like this. Laser pointer. Yeah. I forgot that I don't say that this is not a Mac, but now it works. Good. Okay. So what we see here actually is, and what is important is you see that this part of the DMN default mode network C can distinguish already between in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, while DMNA, the social one, distinguishes in the last stage. I forgot to say that this is in the preclinical stage. These are people that are totally normal. They are totally normal. They just came as controls. They came as volunteers. Now, to show you further the importance of orientation, I would like to present one case from here. This is a brother of a patient speaking about his, now I have to get out of it. Yeah.
פה המצב בתקופה האחרונה השתנה מקצה לקצה בצורה קיצונית ביותר. מבחינת אהבה, מבחינת תלות. הוא מסתכל טלוויזיה, מסתכל עליה, בואי, כמה את יפה. היא במטבח, היא מבשלת, הוא לוקח כיסא, יושב לידה. נראית משגעת, אין כמו אשתי בעולם, אין בכל המשפחה כמו אשתי. אין בכל המשפחה כמו אשתי שיודעת לבשל. זה אחד לדור, אחד לזה. אתה יודע, אתה כבר מתחיל.
This is something that we see in the clinics when patients are, for example, this patient, he only like concentrated about his wife, for the good side. But people are puzzled because, okay, fine, you love her, she's a good cook, but she's not the best cook on earth. She's looking fine, but she's not the top model of the world. Now, the concept of orientation can explain it. This is a work of social orientation that we did with Robin Dunbar to map the different circles in one's life. And you see that most of the brain, here in red, most of the social brain is dedicated to the 5 most important people in one's social network. So 80% of the brain is dedicated to the closest people, 20% of the brain is dedicated to all the rest. Now, this is already an important finding by itself. For me, it says that I have to invest more in my family. So, Molly, when we are going outdoors, we are not thinking about, I'm just running after the kids. But with respect to Alzheimer's disease, here you see the brain of patients with Alzheimer's disease. You see that 2 things happen. First of all, the representation of all other people are disappeared. So we stay only with the closest circle, and even in this closest circle, it shrinks. So even from the closest circle, sometimes people are more aware of the family members that are closer to them, and they don't remember like everybody. So here you see how the concept of orientation has an explanatory power for things that we see in the clinics. So I hope that I convinced you that orientation is important. What about neuropsychiatry? Because Augusta D was also presented with, or first of all presented with mental disorder. So, and this is something that is the main activity of Maurice Friedman here from the Baycrest and from the Permanent Policy Center for Neurology and Behavioral Support. And what Maurice does with his VBM program is to reduce the burden of people who with Alzheimer's disease who present with neuropsychiatric disorders from 90% to 30%, especially these people who are going through hospitalization from as 70% to 10%. And indeed, this is a neglected part of Alzheimer's disease. And Maurice is here speaking about patients with Alzheimer's disease, but actually neuropsychiatric disorders are the very first phenomena to come in patients years before the disease is apparent. There are slight changes, and you say, okay, age a little bit, maybe they don't work now, so they can read more the news and be angry about, I don't know, who is the prime minister here, Donald Trump or somebody. So, yeah, fortunately not here. So just to give you an example of the landscape of neuropsychiatry, that even neuropsychiatry, it's not just one thing, it's a landscape of things. So this is another collaboration that we did with people at Harvard, the group of Mike Fox that had a completely genuine idea, like how to make a lesion network mapping. Not like traditional lesion studies that you find a patient with a deficit, you find a lesion and then you associate them, but to identify the whole network of brain. It's really like mind-blowing method, and this is the work that we did, for example, on orientation, to identify the brain network of orientation that you can see here, which is a default mode network out of people with different lesions, but with disorientation. And we use the same method to identify the neuropsychiatric disorders in people with MCI and with Alzheimer's disease. And we compared it to people that have these symptoms due to traumatic brain injury. And you see here in I need to put this. Here in blue and orange, you see the tau analysis, the patients with Alzheimer's disease and MCI, and these are the patients with TBI, and you can appreciate the similarity between these TBI patients which have a specific lesion and the brain networks of patients along the Alzheimer's disease continuum, which don't have a lesion, but it's an analysis of the tau deposits. And what's important is to see the different like the landscapes, the different symptoms, agitation, like with Augusta D, anxiety, apathy, irritability, disinhibition, depression. And you can imagine why it's so difficult to identify it early, because if somebody is a little bit depressed, so fine, I'm a little bit depressed now. If it's time that I open the news, I become more and more depressed. Is it related to Alzheimer's disease, or is it related to whoever? Well, you can't know. We are all agitated with what is going to do, what is going to happen, what are we going to do? So it's very easy to relate the symptoms not to a disease. And then when a disease comes 15 years later, nobody knows that it was already manifested in the agitation that we had at the time. So I hope that I managed to convince you that people who are going to develop Alzheimer's disease years later may present with very many clinical signs, both cognitive and neuropsychiatric, and this is expressed in a corresponding brain network that is also can be brain-wide. This is very different from the standard approach, which is the BRAC criteria, starting with here in the MTL and spreading to the cortex, and even recent efforts to relate to Alzheimer's disease. So they just did the classification for 4 different disorders, which only 2 of them are Alzheimer's disease. One is memory and another is not memory, as is exemplified here. And they called it typical, that you have both, and then atypical one if you have just memory, atypical either if you have just behavior, and that's it. Now, what I'm trying to convince you is that actually we have, when we speak about memory, we don't speak just about the medial temporal lobe. We speak about all the memory network, and this is just one network of one symptom. So if there are so many symptoms in the behavior and so many symptoms in the cognition, and each one of them depends on such a network, which is so complicated, how can we go around? And the answer is to do meta modeling through AI, but this is not the whole story. So this is it. But we don't have only these things. We also have the pathology. And even the pathology is not only one thing. This is an analysis that Uri Elias and Lidor Gazit did on the UK Biobank. The UK Biobank is a database of 500,000 people that were followed up longitudinally since 2006. Evidently, some of them developed Alzheimer's disease, and we have their electronic health record of so many years. So we took people that already have Alzheimer's disease for 10 years. Yeah, we are now 2025. It started at 2026. So we could identify almost 5,000 people with Alzheimer's disease and MCI. And we wanted to see what disorders did they have along this 20 years that were identified 10 years before and were significantly different from people who did not develop Alzheimer's disease. And I don't know if you can see all of these things, but each one of these is different category. So you have one category of endocrine diseases and vascular diseases and infectious diseases and inflammatory diseases. And for example, very many involve the gastrointestinal tract, like gastritis, esophagitis. And now, we know that this is related, and actually a work that analyzed 1,700,000 people in the United States found that from the only 5 drugs showed a preventive activity against Alzheimer's disease, and 2 of them were the simple drug that are proton pump inhibitors that are against all of these GI inflammations. So you see that even this is very complex and very personalized, because if somebody has gastritis, okay, we should treat it for gastritis. And this is important because people, half of the population are prescribed with omeprazole and other PPIs, but how many people really take it daily, and not only when they feel some kind of gastroesophageal regurgitation? Most of the people don't do, 90% of them. So this is something that can be very important. 2 more slides and then Molly. And the last thing is genetics. Genetics is also very complicated. There is the 0.1% of people who have familial Alzheimer's disease, but what about all the others? So we have to do genetic analysis of everything, and we don't have time to detail, so we will just show you this. This shows the interaction between one important genotype, ApoE genotype, and the risk factors. So you see that people with ApoE genotype of E4, the most prevalent for Alzheimer's disease, so they are actually not related to the vascular risk factor, which makes sense because they don't need vascular risk factors, they have the genetic risk factors. So this is also a complete landscape that should be put in the model. We don't have time, so I will just end with the goals that the meta model for AD should do. So the model should do an integration of the multi-levels of data and the different factors within each level. It should consider the temporal aspects, because the time series and the unfolding across time is also very important and different from one person to another. It should provide a mechanistic explanation so we can test it. It should identify key causal pathways to provide feedback loops and then to make them more stronger. It has to stratify patients into distinct subtypes and phenotypes, and this will help the clinicians to put patients in the different phenotypes. And finally, we would like to generate a hypothesis about disease evolution, and then we can test ourselves and see if we prove right or wrong. And finally, come with these recommendations to the individual patient that can be tested longitudinally. So Clara is already around the world, and I hope that we can make it much bigger and stronger here with your help by all means. And yeah, the conclusions, I don't need to repeat them because I repeated them so many times in the last 50 minutes. So I will end with a personal thing, if you don't mind, which is important for me. And the thing is that I'm coming, as you know, from Jerusalem. And in my institute, it's really a paradise in the means of that half of the doctors are Arabs and Palestinians, half are Jews, half of the patients, literally, the nurses, of course, as well. And even in the lab, people who are working in about this project. And this is what Jerusalem should look like. This is not what it looks like anymore if you're not updated. And I do believe in the old international and especially Jewish vision of learning and science and medicine to be values. And I hope that what we do here is in this line. So I just like to thank the people who did the work, people who supported the work, and you for your attention and coping with me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. That was brilliant. I have a better understanding and realization of the complexity. No, you don't have to go away yet. Stay. Of Alzheimer's disease. We do have a little bit of time for questions. I always think science is about asking questions. And so does anybody have a question? We have a microphone. Yes, go ahead, Shirley.
Hi, very nice work. I want to see more outcomes from your modeling. I have a question about the imaging of those brains. So what's the signal? It's a glucose uptake or there are different types, right?
Yeah, there were different types, and I apologize for not having the time to delve into. So it depends, but again, it goes for all directions. Like some of the work for glucose uptake, I didn't show here, but we do have works also with glucose uptake in PET FDG. The works that I showed here will encompass like 3 different things. One is a simple structural MRI. In structural MRI, you can already do some kind of analysis like VBM, not Morris VBM, voxel brain morphometry, and count voxel, and then the ways that you can evaluate neurodegeneration. What I showed, like for example, with the default node network was fMRI, so it's functional MRI, so it's a bold activity. And what I showed with the neuropsychiatry was PET, was the tau deposition as detected by positron emission tomography. But again, this is the importance of having a tool that can encompass not only the brain network, as I mentioned, but also, as you very correctly mentioned, the method that it was captured, and also to project from one module to another. Like for example, one patient will have an amyloid PET, another patient, which I also showed in the work from Harvard, another person will have a tau PET, and another person will have just MRI. So can I conclude and take a person that did all of these studies, and then I can take, with the model, I can take a person that just did a normal MRI, and from my previous knowledge about how the PET FDG that you mentioned is expressed in MRI, it will project to the MRI of a patient who never did this MRI, and this is AI can do.
Okay, I don't know.
Did you have a question, Berlin? Yeah, so we'll have one more question over here, and then we're going to go to our panel discussion. So I acknowledge you have a question. Maybe you can bring it to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm not a researcher in Alzheimer's, so my question may seem naive, but I was just wondering, there are studies to show that there may be hormonal changes, and so there are significant sex differences in Alzheimer's. And I was just wondering, in any of the modeling that you did, if there was a sex difference that was elicited, and also like the types that you had identified, were the differences by sex?
Yeah. Again, this is a one, at least 1 hour conference just about sex differences in Alzheimer's disease. And there is a lot of literature about it, and people say that it's more in women, but actually it's not. The phenotypes are different, and there are phenotypes that are more apparent in women. There are others that are not. And of course, with respect to the hormonal cycles, so this you find in women and much less in men and so forth. So yeah, of course, sex is important. Sex is inserted into all of these models, and you see differences in all level. I will give you just an example for the cognitive level. Like people, if you ask, so people will tell you that men navigate much better than women. So this is what it is according to our data. This is not true. Maybe navigation per se, but at least in spatial orientation, women and men are totally equal. So of course, it's super important. And super important it has to be in the individual level, because there are women who perform less than men in navigation, but there are women that perform better than men in navigation. So to generalize about everybody just from several examples is mistakes that can, of course, we can take when we have to treat people in a specific preventive disorder ahead of time. So absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you for the questions. And I know there's some that we didn't get to. But first, let's join me in thanking Shahar for a brilliant presentation. And so stretch, and we're going to move to the next part of our discussion. So we have a panel discussion now, and the panel will be moderated by Dr. Allison Sekuler. So she is the Sandra A. Rotman Chair in Cognitive Neuroscience and the Vice President of Research at Baycrest Health Services. She holds faculty positions in the Department of Psychology, Neuroscience, and Behavior at McMaster University and the Department of Psychology at the University of Toronto. So I'm not sure how you have so many positions and still are living and breathing. Her research uses behavioral and neuroimaging approaches to understand how the brain processes visual information with specific interests in face perception, motion processing, perceptual learning, neuroplasticity, aging, and neurotechnology. So now I think you can understand why Allison is the perfect person to be moderating our discussion. Her research was the first to show conclusively that older brains rewire themselves to compensate for functional changes. And I think the rewiring and plasticity in the brain is really so exciting. It really tells us that you really can have lifelong learning. And Allison, thank you so much for joining us. I'll invite you to introduce the panel.
So much, Molly. And the first person I want to introduce on the panel, you know very well, Shahar, if you want to come back on up. I'm not going to reintroduce you because you've been introduced, so maybe you want to have a seat at the end there. Thanks. And I'd like to invite up a couple more people. First, Michael Brudno, who is a professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Toronto, and he's also the chief data scientist at the University Health Network. Maybe go up those stairs instead. He's also a faculty member at the Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence and the scientific director of HPC for Health, which is a private computing cloud in Ontario that focuses on the hospitals. Michael's primary area of interest for his research is in the development of computational models for the analysis of clinical and genomic data sets, especially in the capture of precise clinical data from clinicians using effective user interfaces and its utilization in the automated analysis of genomes. His work focuses on the capture of structured phenotypic data from clinical encounters using both refined user interfaces and also mining unstructured data based on machine learning methodology, and also the analysis of omics data, genome, transcriptome, and epigenome, in the context of structured patient phenotypes. So please join me in welcoming Michael. Thanks. And I'd also like to welcome Brad Buchsbaum, who studies how we consciously remember the past, why some memories are vivid and others are vague, and how these experiences are reflected in brain activity. And Brad is a senior scientist at Baycrest in the Rotman Research Institute. His lab is using functional MRI and machine learning to decode the content and quality of memory from neural patterns with a focus on how memory changes with aging. And he and his team are also developing AI-based diagnostic tools for detecting mild cognitive impairment in Alzheimer's disease from figure drawing tasks such as the clock drawing task, which I think we're going to hear a little bit more about in a moment. These methods offer promising accessible avenues for early screening and precision assessment of cognitive decline. And then the last thing I just want to say before I move over to the panel for more discussion is just a word about Baycrest. So Baycrest is the home of the Rotman Research Institute, which is where Brad and I spend most of our time. We're also both professors in the Department of Psychology here at the University of Toronto. And Baycrest's vision as a whole is a world where every older person lives with dignity and purpose and fulfillment. And we really believe that this issue that we're talking about today, precision aging, how do we make sure each person is getting exactly what they need at the right time, in the right place for that person in the moment, whether they are here in downtown Toronto, whether they are up in the Yukon, whether they are in Jerusalem, whether they are in Cape Town, South Africa, anywhere in the world, everyone will be able to get exactly what they need to live their best possible life. And so when we're thinking about dementia, it was really wonderful, Shahar, to hear the whole history, but also you did mention the need for prevention, as well as early detection and treatment and care. So that's when we're thinking about it, we think about what does healthy brain aging look like? What can we do to prevent dementia? How can we detect it as early as possible? How can we treat it for people who need it? And how can we care for people who are living with it? And we really believe that the discussion we're having today around precision aging and ML and AI in aging and brain health, that is going to help us get there. So with that, I want to turn over to the panel. And I'll start by asking maybe Brad to say just a little bit about your response to what Shahar said, and also tell us a little bit about what your vision of the future is. Shahar started at the past and then also brought us to the future. What's your vision of the future?
So yeah, very sympathetic with the argument you laid out about clearly the multifactorial nature of something complex like Alzheimer's disease. It can't, very unlikely, I mean, it could be, but it turns out that it's not one underlying single mechanism or one gene necessarily in the vast majority of the cases. And it just got me thinking about the extent to which disease, if you track back, as you nicely did the history, there was a doctor named Alzheimer's and there was an initial patient. And then here we are, how many years later? 100. We're still talking about that doctor and that name, Alzheimer's disease. And then what we have to do is, in some sense, the language is insufficient for the phenomenon under study. So we've got this word, Alzheimer's disease, it's entrenched. And yet it appears that the reality, the biological reality, is that either it's not one disease, it's a collection of complex phenomenon, and that's then what you have things like atypical Alzheimer's. You have an explosion sort of phenomenon of ways of referring to this complexity. So I think really the way through this is what you're suggesting is that what a disease is really, it's in some sense a complex combination of all these different factors that's changing over time. And some of these things may turn out to be more or less describable by a word like Alzheimer's disease. In some cases, maybe not. I mean, if you look in psychiatry, schizophrenia, depression, bipolar disorder, all of these things are cases where there's a word, schizophrenia, there's a name, depression, bipolar disorder. And yet when you look at the research, they were hoping to find a gene, and that what's emerged really with enormous genetic studies is that something like schizophrenia is the combination of a lot of tiny effects in the genome spread out. So it turns out there's not one word. So again, the way forward, or my vision, is precisely that you need the data that's sufficient to characterize something as complex like Alzheimer's disease, that spans across different modalities from the blood to cognition, right? I think I agree with you that just using the theoretical curve and assuming that you have sort of biomarkers always precede cognitive signs probably may or may not be correct, right? It could have to do with the sensitivity of the test. So I think everything should be on the table. And really that's where, we're here to discuss AI. That's what AI is unusually good at. That's what it's going to be better than all of us. Nobody can hold all that stuff in mind. But for AI, this is easy in some sense, provided it has the data, it has sort of the sophistication of algorithms increases, what we're going to have is much better way to say what it is that we're dealing with. It may not be a word of the English language, and we're going to have to develop new words.
So, Michael, I wonder if you can speak a little bit about, it was really interesting at the end, the complexity. I think people do think, oh, it's Alzheimer's. In fact, people think that all of dementia is Alzheimer's often. They don't realize that there's more than one kind of dementia. You did a great job of laying out how complex it can be, that it's not just, oh, someone can't remember, where they put their keys. It goes well beyond that. Given all of those complexities, Michael, and given all of the different sorts of issues about, the genetic, and I really liked that the slide you had that showed all of the different layers. Are we ready to put all of that together? And what's your view about how we can get there, what AI can do for us, and what's your vision of the future there?
Yeah, so I agree completely about sort of lacking the right terminology to describe just the complexity of things that go into a diagnosis. There's a media event happening a few hundred miles to the south where they're talking about curing autism and how all of that's going to be magically solved with, vitamins and lack of Tylenol. But the one thing is, like, autism is not one disease, Alzheimer's is not one disease. There's a really huge complexity of both phenotype and underlying genetics. On the phenotypic side, we have things that will present in some patients, but not others. And in the genetic side, again, you can have very different underlying genetic processes happening that lead to very similar phenotypes and vice versa. And understanding all of that complexity requires a lot of information, a lot of data. Collecting all of this data, analyzing it, and then making it available to the clinician, to the researcher who will draw insight, and to the clinician who will then help with the treatment. So really, that's where AI is going to help a lot. AI is amazing at finding patterns in data that humans cannot spot. It can look at millions of numbers, and to us, they look like millions of numbers, and we have no hope of finding any sense in them because it's just so high dimensional. We can look at the means of those numbers, we can plot a distribution, we can see how the distribution shifted slightly. But once you get into that same distribution in 50 dimensions, most humans have trouble thinking about 50 dimensions. AI doesn't care about the number of dimensions. It's just numbers, and it's looking for patterns. So AI will help us a lot in those, in terms of the treatment of, in figuring out what are the right groups of patients. When we talk about precision medicine, yes, we want to get to N equals 1, but N equals 1 is going to be really hard. Figuring out the treatment for that one patient, but let's figure out not a group of 1 million. Let's figure out a group of 100, because for that group of 100, we can identify a pattern using AI while a human can't. So driving those treatments is something that I think will happen in the near future if we get the right data together. And that data includes data coming from research, because a lot of these genetic tests are not being done as part of standard of care. It's collecting data that's clinical, that when we actually see that, it's very broad data, and we can get it on millions of individuals, but not very deep. And it's going to become data from devices that all of us are wearing every day on our hands.
Yeah. Has anyone seen the show Severance? Raise your hands if you've seen the show Severance. You guys are too busy doing science to watch it, or you're just so there's a show called Severance on Apple TV. We're not sponsored by Apple, but everyone should get it. And in that, what you were saying about seeing the patterns sort of reminded me that one of the jobs that they have is to look at these numbers that are swirling on the screen and feel when it is like an angry set of numbers or something. You never really understand what they're doing, but it's like that pattern. In that case, they're constrained because they are limited by the human brain, right? So not everyone can do this. They've got to learn how to do it. The AI systems don't have those same kinds of constraints. And I'm wondering, Shahar, when you were talking about the work that you did using the human connectome, which is based on real data in brains, how important is it for us to think about having human brain-based models versus just take advantage of whatever AI can do? Because there is a debate in the neuroscience, community about, well, we should be focusing our work in AI to make it really realistic about how does the human brain work versus how can we use AI to solve a problem which may or may not be linked to the brain. So what's your thought about how much does it have to be linked to how the human brain actually works, or are there ways we can take advantage of AI that go beyond that?
Look, I'm a clinician in my first training. So when it comes to clinics, we don't really mind. Like, I mean, if if God reveals to me and says, well, this is the drug of choice, and you give the drug of choice and it works, whoever. So it's, the system has to work, and if it's brain-based or totally artificial, so we don't mind as long as this is the best model. Now, having said that, you enter into a huge debate about whether or what is the best way to design an AI model. And this has a long history because it started back to the times of Judea Pearl and Mervyn Minsky in the 60s and 70s, and then the perceptron and the neural networks in the 80s and the 90s, and then their death, and then they're really coming to life in terms of large-scale networks and deep networks and LLMs. So historically, and that's why I like the history so much, historically, probably without the image of a brain network and without neural networks, we wouldn't come into deep networks. That's where they ecologically and evolutionary evolved. But nowadays, when all these tools exist, so the best tools that can do the work is most welcome. That's what I would
Brad,
say.
I wonder if you can speak to that and also maybe tell us a little bit about the kind of models that you're using in the clockwork that was mentioned.
So, yeah, so on the human brain, I think it will be important. If you look at what the most sophisticated large language models, what their problem is right now, is basically they don't learn continually. So they're trained to a fixed spot. They're frozen. Then they go out in the world, and whatever they knew they have a cutoff knowledge date. And your conversations, they have ways of providing with some kind of memory, but it's very ad hoc. So these things do not learn continuously, whereas humans, we're always learning. After this event, I'm going to remember it. I'm going to dream, and it's going to replay in my mind a little bit. So they have not figured out how to do that. And actually, one of the major heads of Google, a head of DeepMind, is a guy named Demis Hassabis. And he is the only one of such leaders. First of all, I won a Nobel Prize, but he was actually a cognitive neuroscientist. He did fMRI research before he did DeepMind. So if I were to bet on someone who is going to tackle that, it's actually his group. And I know that they are working on things that will include sort of continuous learning and the hippocampal-like functionality in these large language models. So that's going to be absolutely fundamental. The other thing is, you may know that large language models like GPT, they have this problem called hallucinating. So what they do is they occasionally, since they always have to give a response, right? It's a chat bot. You give it a prompt, it gives a response, must provide something. They're very poor at essentially inspecting their own memory to say, actually, I don't know the answer. I should probably not say anything. And I think a reason for this, they lack what we call episodic memory. That's something I study. Episodic memory, again, is this ability to remember what happened to me specifically yesterday, a year ago. And I can call back a kind of memory in my mind and inspect, and I say, I don't know the answer to that, or I know that for sure I was at that event. So they have no experience and no ability to recall these specific memories. All they have is what we call semantic memory, that is memory for facts and places and the semantic nexus of information. So again, I think it's going to be really important going forward. They have this kind of episodic memory. Moving to what we've done with the clock drawing, and just briefly, there's a clock in the back there. So just if anyone doesn't know what an analog clock looks like, this came up earlier. How long are these still going to be around? But for the moment in neurology clinics, it's often sort of a first test that people give is you give a patient a piece of paper, a pencil, and say, draw a clock at 11:10. And it just so happens in the Toronto area and many other areas, actually, we collect these clocks, and they've been collecting these clocks and storing them in a database for many years now. And so when I started working with Morris Friedman, neurologist he was mentioned in the talk, I started thinking, well, how can these be used as images to be studied with these deep neural networks? Because they have so much information. It's a drawing, but it's also an image. And the way in which a person draws a clock has many ways in which it can fail and shows something that, again, it requires a clinician with many, many years of experience to look at a clock and have that kind of experience. So what we found was, in fact, that we could train one of these models to look at a picture of a clock and be able to decode whether that person has dementia or not, and also score the clock without having to have any sort of manual scoring rules, et cetera. But I think to me, this is one example of AI where it's very powerful, is it can take something, it takes very little time to acquire, but has high information. So the clock drawing is one example of this. Another example is a speech sample. So you can give a person a picture of a complex scenario and then say, describe this, and then record it. Well, that can take a minute or two, but there's an immense amount of information that you extract from that, writing samples, et cetera. So this is where I think in the short term, AI can be very valuable right now because it's fast and can score things in an unbiased way. It's provided we have sufficient data.
Michael, just turning to you, following on that, you mentioned everyone's got, or not everyone, but many people have various sorts of devices we wear that are keeping track of everything. So this is one example. When you think about Internet of Things, robotics, AR, VR, XR, all of the different kind of platforms that are developing along with artificial intelligence, how do you see all of it coming together? So yes, we can do this with the clock, but that's one element. So when you think about the future, are we ready to put it all together? And where do you see it going?
I'm not sure we're ready to put it all together, but we for sure are ready to start building components. And I think a lot of the things that we will have to answer as we're building things is, which of these are we as a society ready for? So doing something like grading clocks using an AI algorithm versus having a human do it, 99% of the time it's going to be fine, unless there is some kind of bias in how you collected your database of clocks, that it didn't include certain population, and as a result, the algorithm isn't valid. But that's a technical thing which, we as a society, we scientists will be able to work through. We will be able to collect representative data. We'll be able to upweigh the data, sort of like polling, right? We can get relatively accurate polls of votes by, asking 1,000 people, because there aren't random 1,000 people. Those are 1,000 people that are reasonably well chosen to be representative of the whole population. So I think those are the things that will be easy to solve. The interesting parts to me are going to be when we push the boundaries, when we want to build AI that actually changes how we approach care, when we push AI that's going to enable patients to stay at home longer. This is great, but what happens when that AI fails? Because it will. Anything you build will fail. Are we willing to tolerate, a 2% failure rate for the ability for patients to stay at either home for extra several months in their, journey with dementia? Are we willing to tolerate more severe errors, because nothing in our lives is perfect, in order to enable better care for these individuals? One of the examples I like to bring, which is very controversial depending who I speak with, is, are we ready for having a deep fake, a virtual agent that is a copy of a caretaker? Would you be willing to have a virtual version of you help take care of an aging relative? Somebody with a computer screen, at least initially, with whom your aging relative can interact with, ask them questions, get answers in your voice. Maybe that agent is trained on things you have said in the past. So to some extent, that agent is actually maybe a better relative than even you are yourself. When are we ready for that as a society? Will we ever be? I think those are amazing questions that for us to think about as to where we need to stop. Because to be honest, I could build an agent like that tomorrow. You know, it's not going to be quite as good as you. Maybe it'll still be worse than you, and that'll make you feel better. But what happens when it gets better?
And one of my other hats that I wear is the president of and chief scientist at the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation. And several years ago, we funded a company that was not quite going that far. It's something that we've been thinking a lot about, obviously, but even just something for people who wander at night, that there's the voice recording of a person who, when it senses somebody is by the door in the middle of the night, it'll say, you know, Henry, it's time to go to bed, you know, and hearing the wife's voice in that case says to Henry, oh, it's time to, and it makes sense given what you were saying about how when you have Alzheimer's, your social representation in the brain shrinks down to just really the people that you're closest to. So this kind of innovation, you know, could make a lot of sense, because we do see when people are agitated and so on, that they do respond better to loved ones, usually if they like them, I guess, than they would to strangers. So having said that, are they ready? And this was something else that came up. So maybe, well, a question for anyone really. It's also, is society as a whole ready for this? There's all kinds of legal issues. There's all kinds of philosophical issues. We could create the best kinds of innovations here, but if there aren't the right kind of regulations and policies and so on in place, and people aren't ready for it, will we be able to achieve what we want? And one last thing from CABI, we just released our latest Age Tech Insights report, looking at views for Canadians, about 2,000 Canadians, 55 and older across the entire country, on technology. There's a very positive view of what technology can do. The vast majority are already using technology in finance and in social interactions, but not in health. And it's not just because we don't have the tools available, there's a trust issue. So I wonder if people can maybe speak to some of those issues. Are we ready? What can we do to help people get ready?
I'll be happy to take the question, because it buzzes us and it also direct our efforts. And because when you want to create an infrastructure like that, what we try to do, you can go in one of two major directions. One direction will be to go through the institutes, like through the medical system, through the health providers, and then you need also to go through the regulations. And the other possibility is to go directly through the users. One motivation to go through the users is that we should direct it and access the aging population, not the people who are already affected with dementia. But another is our ability to get a lot of data and to get a lot of impact, like to really help people. And here, the answer to your question, I think, is straightforward. If 10 years ago, I would ask you, is it okay that I will put in your hand a device that knows exactly where you are, what you purchase, what you write to your dearest ones? I will take pictures of you in very many situations, and the dearest one of yours, and will, et cetera, and you say, hell not. And now if you raise your hand, you all see that you have actually two of them on you. So that's why we say to ourselves, okay, we know that we lose a lot of privacy, but we get a lot of other things, and our privacy anyways, we lost it years ago. So we say, if we lose it, as Mike said, if you lose it for companies and so many bad guys, at least we will lose this privacy to get better health. So I think that the reality answered the question already.
Yeah, I would have said, heck yeah. 10 years ago, but I'm not normal, I don't think. But a lot of people don't, and there are different populations, certainly in Canada, are indigenous populations, folks in the Black community, et cetera, that have had historically challenging, to say the least, relationships with medical world and have good reason to not trust. So I'm wondering, like, what do you guys think about what we can do, taking into account, what Shahar has just shared? What can we do to make sure that, again, with a precision aging approach, we're really designing things, not for different populations, but by and with those populations?
Well, yeah, just following up just briefly on whether people are going to accept the technology. I think if you ask two people, I mean, ask your parents. If you have elderly parents, I have one is so excited by AI, and then the other is sort of horrified and makes a face whenever it's mentioned. So you have this sort of bipolar reaction to it. But I think what will happen, certainly with a younger generation, once the value proposition is sufficiently on the plus side of AI and demonstrably so, even if you have to hold your nose a little bit, maybe you'll opt for the avatar who's a little bit more sympathetic and also has better judgment. That probably will happen, and it could be 10, 15 years, but it's almost at this point inevitable. As to your question, I think there just has to be, first of all, a concerted effort really with outreach, and I think to involve everybody in society, across societies. I think there's already an enormous effort in Canada to do this. And to reach out to underprivileged communities and certainly make them aware. There is an education aspect to make them aware of what are the pros and cons of AI at this point and how it could benefit them potentially, and what data security means and privacy and what the risks are and so on. So yeah, I think it's a matter of outreach and education.
I just mostly to agree. It's outreach and education. We can put as many technical safeguards as you want, but it really comes down to the acceptance in the population. And almost none of these things are about technical sophistication or technical knowledge. It's just about the comfort of the community with that set of technology, whether it's AI technology or anything else.
Yeah, and the co-design element is so critical. So if you just design it and then say, okay, here it is, educate them at that point, it's too late. So bringing people in from the very beginning from conception of the idea all the way through the development and all the way through the testing and adoption. And it may need to be done in slightly different ways to address different needs. We want to open it up to questions in the community here. So I think there's another mic that's going around. Any questions for the panelists?
Hi. I watched a short video, something like the precision medicine. Many people 100 years old look like 50 in year 2032. Another piece of data that's easily to make people live 150, something like that. What are you going to talk about this short video?
So I think the question is about longevity. There's some ideas that people may be able to live to be 120 or 150. And there's also variability in how people age. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to
that. The Alps, and then there was an old lady, looked very old, and I asked her, like, may I ask you, how old are you? She said 95. And she was like hiking on a 3,000. And then you say, well, if I can hike at the age of 95, so yes, if I have to stay in bed, I'm not so sure. So this shows that it all comes to the individual person, and I don't think that we can live like forever, like this billionaires think for themselves, but we can definitely improve our ability to age in a better condition if we follow an individualized program of lifestyle and medical treatment. Now, the problem is that most of people don't have neither the financial ability, nor the time, or the focus of attention, like to do everything. And what AI can contribute is about waiting, like to say, okay, there are, and the AI is blind to the impact, just a number. Like, what is the most important change that one has to do in your life? What is the second? What is also the difference between the first and the second, or the first and the second and the third? And then you can make the recommendation that can be adapted by the person, because I don't know if you know or not, but the most important factor by far of the success of a medical treatment is not the molecule itself, neither the doctor, is the compliance. 50% of medical treatments are failing because of compliance. And of course, if you get from your doctor a copy-paste of something, or you get a list of 100 things to do, you will do nothing. But if I can tell you, if you do exactly this, you can reduce the relative risk by this and this. And if you do 1 and 2, it has a synergistic. And if you do, so I ask you to do 1 and 2, that's it. And you come after 3 months and I can show you the difference, and you say, okay, so now we can do 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So this is a way that AI can give you a compliance, and that you can extend as much as possible whatever genetics and other factors decides for you.
Yeah, and I think the real key is, yes, we probably can extend the lifespan to some extent, where there's huge debates, as you probably know, looming around how far can it go. But what's more important is expanding your health span. So however old you are getting, you want to make sure that you're living as well as possible. Things like, as you were saying, if you eat the right kind of diet, you can actually decrease your cognitive age by 7.5 years, which if you're 8 isn't a good thing, but if you're 88 is a good thing, right? So I'm sorry, I'm saying it wrong. You would have the cognitive capacity as someone who is younger, that you haven't declined yet, if that makes any sense. I clearly need to eat a better diet to explain that better. But in any case, like in general, a lot of people think if my grandma had dementia or my dad had dementia, I'm going to get it. As you saw, it's not hugely linked to the genetics. At least 45% of the risk factors for dementia are things we've got some control over. So the CLARA program and things like the Kimmel Family Center for Brain Health and Wellness at Baycrest, those are all ways of us taking this personalized approach to help you live your best possible life as long as you can. So I think we might have time for one more question, 1 or 2 more questions.
Hi, everyone. First of all, big fan of Claire, Shahar. And my question is, you guys are doing very pioneering work in research, and where the right direction is not very obvious. So when you face uncertainty in research, or let's say a roadblock, what helps you decide whether to push forward or to pivot or to stop? How do you decide on that?
How do you decide when to keep going and when to just pack it in?
I'll give this one a shot. I think it really comes down to experience, and when you are seeing and in your level of belief in whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. If you really believe that something is true and just the experiment isn't working out because of technical issues, because the data isn't quite right, because the model needs to be tweaked a bit more, you keep going. But and then at some point, if you keep going for too long, you sort of need to decide, well, I've thrown enough good money after bad money that I need to stop. It comes down to experience, and it comes down to talking to colleagues and asking them if they have done things that are similar. Because if you're working on an idea there is a pretty good chance that somebody else elsewhere is working on a very similar idea. And if it didn't work for not just you, but if it didn't work for, 3, 4, 5 other people, that's more evidence that it's time to pivot rather than persevere.
Yeah, and it is important to publish even if things don't work, so people know you tried it. There's so many cases of file drawer failures, and it wastes a lot of time and money. I think you have raised your hand at the very beginning, so I want to make sure you get your question in. Yeah.
Sure, I'll see how well I can formulate this question. I guess the brain is a really plastic organ, and so presumably an AI-based intervention, there could potentially be a plastic response. So if you say categorize Alzheimer's patients as most likely to progress quickly, and they have that belief, is that actually going to do harm to their ability to respond to a treatment because they now believe they're classified as a quick progressor? And how would you kind of build that into the models? Because I hear, I work in the area of cancer, and a clinician said, the mindset of the patient, it makes a really big difference on how they respond to the drugs. And you would think that would be even more so in the brain because of its plasticity. So kind of a random question, but if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, and wellness and mindset absolutely plays a role in brain health. It can even have effects on the mitochondria. So who wants to say, how does mindset affect?
Well, patients with Alzheimer's disease, for the good and for the better, like classical Alzheimer's disease, they have an anosognosia to the disease. We say, what is better to pour half of the bottle of whiskey because they are shaking, or forget where did you leave it? So they have anosognosia. So unlike patients with cancer, they are less exposed to at this stage to the belief. There is a huge impact at the aging stage. That's why we are at the stage of aging, and that's why it's a Pamela and Paul Austin Research Center on Aging and not on dementia, because on the dementia, they are happily ever after in their dementia, and we are at the aging side. And usually, you see the patient, you see the family, and the family is anxious. The patient is not anxious at all. However, if you do it in the aging stage, and then you have to use all of these mental and cognitive powers, you have to believe in the importance of doing taking preventive steps, and also the cognitive, because always today is Rosh Hashanah, and so people will put on the table 5 different of desserts, and nonetheless you have to take the fruit and not all the rest. So you need the cognitive power which are related. But I do believe in the importance of the mental power and the importance of cognitive power altogether. And that's why you see these people with a 95-year-old climbing the Alps, unlike people in the cities of the United States, because they will take exactly what they need and not a single bit more than that, because they have this both mental and cognitive power.
Yeah, I don't have a full answer, but there's the other element that if you have extremely good capability of prediction, way in advance based on genetics or what have you, and you tell a 35-year-old, well, you have a 99% chance you're going to get early onset Alzheimer's disease. Well, okay, that's maybe not that useful to a person who wants to live out their life and so on. So either you have to have really good reason, in other words, in terms of how can you change that trajectory? In other words, you have to have something in place. Well, look, this is going to happen, but you can do this, that, the other, and you can actually, we're going to get you another 15 years or whatever if you do this right. I'd say people would be quite motivated to follow that advice. But I think at the end of the day, there has to be some sort of personal autonomy in terms of what it is you want to give over and what you want to know. I think that has to always be the case. It always has to be an opt-in sort of thing.
I guess what you're talking to is effectively, it's a reverse placebo effect. It's and placebo effect is real, and the reverse of it would be equally real. These are issues we also have already struggled with in other diseases. So in things like Huntington's, where our patients told about the diagnosis, and I think we've generally worked those things out.
Yeah, I'm getting a sign that we need to wrap up. Is that right? So
we have one more question from our online audience. For healthcare organizations who are not adopting AI solutions maybe quickly enough or are being overly conscious, do you think there will be catastrophic consequences for them? And what would those consequences be?
turn to Michael to answer this one.
I think the famous quote from Jeff Hinton was that, that there will be no more radiologists, and then it was changed. Well, the radiologists who don't use AI will be replaced by radiologists who do use AI. Unfortunately, I think the pace of adoption of AI or any other technologies in healthcare is painfully slow. We're being very careful to do it right, which is good, but we're being so careful as to do it very slowly. And in some organizations, there is a shining object kind of mentality of AI. It's like, oh, it looks really cool. We need to have it, but we better not touch it. And so it's, will there be consequences to these organizations? I think these organizations will, over time, adapt it and adopt AI wherever it makes sense, just because they will see that all the cool kids on the block are doing it, and they are not in trouble, and they are, they haven't gotten sued, and they are now more efficient. In places where there is intense competition between these institutions, for sure, there may be some who don't make it. In places like downtown Toronto, I don't think any of the hospitals will severely suffer because they are the last to jump on the AI bandwagon. I don't know if that's a popular opinion, but.
Thanks. And just to wrap up, I know there's some questions we weren't able to get to, but I think people may be able to stick around and answer them after. Can I just ask each of you to give us your final thought in like one sentence, words of wisdom, what people should think about for the future? Can we do this? We'll start with you, Shahar.
I'm just trying to be optimist and follow the tradition of our ancestors, to believe in good, to believe in knowledge, to believe that if we follow these two principles, so we can overcome obstacles and have a better world.
Don't throw away any data. It'll come in useful.
Yeah, I echo, don't throw away data. And also, in general, I think the effect will be positive on balance. And so just think of that.
And I just want to say, I think that I'm a huge optimist in this field. I think that we are at a turning point in how we're dealing with dementia and aging. And I'm really excited for what the future holds because of having these kinds of colleagues across different organizations, but also having all of you, the other scientists and researchers and policymakers and students and trainees. I think the future is very bright for aging. And I just want to say thank you for giving us a chance to talk about it here. Thanks very much.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Shahar Arzy. Thank you, Michael Brudno. Thank you, Bradley Buchsbaum. Thank you, Allison Sekuler. I don't know about you, but one of the things I loved about this afternoon, and really what I love about being at the University of Toronto, is the opportunity to learn and to engage. And certainly that's what we did today. And I have so many questions, and I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to expand my mind and think about things differently. I'm so thrilled on behalf of PRiME, Mohammed, to T-CAIREM, to you, to your team for doing this together, because it's been a lot of fun to bring our communities together and learn. So, and lastly, I know Mohammed's going to have the last word, but I just want to thank you all and online for your engagement, because it's never interesting if we're all just talking to each other, and it's so much more interesting when we're engaged and listening ideas are sparked. So thank you. Oh, I'm supposed to tell you a couple of things. The Precision Medicine Initiative always has events. So in 2 days, it's not a dull week, we're hosting BD for a Lunch and Learn. And then in just over a month or two, we're having the Swiss Canadian Innovation Symposium. So these are all open to you to join us and sign up and engage and do, especially this one, I think is probably right in the line of many people here around AI and drug discovery. So final words, I'll advance it for you.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank PRiME. It's been such a great partnership, and pleasure and honor to work with you to bring this together to all of you. And I want to thank you for attending. I also want to thank all the incredible folks who actually organized all of this. We had the easy job. But we want to thank everyone. If we can get a round of applause for everyone who's actually organized this. Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. And I have a few updates as well. All right, here we are. T-CAIREM, please join. If you haven't already, it's a fantastic community, fantastic organization with lots to offer. We have a resources hub, for example, for anyone who wants to learn more about AI. We threw that term out a lot. I imagine many of you are very comfortable with AI, but there are many of you who aren't. So we have an incredible resource hub that people can go to learn. I also want to put a plug in for the T-CAIREM conference that also unfortunately is on November 14th. But both events will be fantastic, and there's more than enough for everybody. But this promises to be a fantastic conference, really focused on generative AI, and we're going to be tackling really tough issues with real-world case studies around how Gen AI is being used, but also some of the ethical, legal issues and some of the methods issues as well. So there's something there for everybody. So thank you, everyone. I think we have the room for the next hour. Yeah. So people want to stay, socialize, network. This is why everyone's here. Please feel free to do so. And hopefully we'll see you at a future event. Thank you.